He never imagined that at 60, after losing his wife, he would find love again. Grief, which seemed endless, was taking over his life. But, surprisingly, a new opportunity arose when he least expected it. It was a rediscovery of something he thought impossible, the possibility of starting over. Have you ever wondered if love has an expiration date? Is there a time when it's too late to open your heart again? For him, the answer was clear. It's never too late to start over. If your heart is still willing to take the risk. Over the months of solitude, he learned that loss, though painful, can also open space for new possibilities, for something unexpected and comforting. And life, as he soon realized, has a curious way of offering us second chances when we least expect it. After years with Laura, his deceased wife, Eduardo had never considered the possibility of starting over. For him, the pain of loss still felt fresh, as if it had happened the day before. The void she had left was impossible to fill, and the world seemed to have lost its luster. But one afternoon, as he walked through the square near his home, something unexpected happened. He was distracted, lost in thought, when his eyes met those of a woman also strolling by. She was alone, with a welcoming smile, as if she possessed an inner peace Eduardo had never known how to find. She approached unhurriedly, and, without further ado, began a simple conversation about the weather. It was funny how, in his mind, he felt in control again, even though, in his heart, there was still a storm raging. Her name was Helena. The conversation began shyly, almost a chance encounter, but something was there. A connection that could not be denied. She spoke about her life calmly, without dramatizing anything. But Eduardo sensed there was something profound about her, a silent understanding of what he had experienced. Helena had also lost someone important in her life, and this, in a way, brought them together instantly. She understood what he felt without needing to say a word about the grief that still consumed him. However, unlike him, she seemed to have found a way to move on, without forgetting. But allowing herself to live again, it was almost impossible for Eduardo to understand how she had managed to do this. How could anyone take such a huge step after such a devastating loss? He questioned his own actions, or rather, the lack thereof. Time, which had always seemed to pass quickly for him, was now being sentenced by the pain of loss. But when he looked at Helena, he felt a spark, a desire for something more. With each meeting, this spark grew. They saw each other little by little, with quiet conversations and small exchanges of experiences. Helena didn't pressure Eduardo to open up, but he was beginning to realize that perhaps the pain wasn't something to be swallowed in silence. He began to feel less isolated, less guilty for somehow allowing life to go on. He realized it wasn't fair to stop living simply because love had gone, but the fear was still there, like a shadow, following him every step of the way. Eduardo wondered, what if I fall in love with her? The idea of loving again seemed like uncharted, risky terrain. He feared the comparison between Helena and Laura was inevitable, but at the same time, he felt drawn to her in a way he couldn't explain, an attraction that wasn't just about her appearance, but also about the calm presence she exuded. Helena wasn't Laura, but that didn't mean she couldn't be someone special in her own way. One evening, as they walked through the city, Helena stopped in front of a small, cozy cafe, the same place where they had first met. The scene was peaceful, the lights softly illuminated the room, and the cool wind seemed to embrace them as they sat. At that moment, something changed. Helena, with her usual smile, spoke. Have you ever considered that maybe love doesn't have to be what it used to be? Sometimes it comes in different forms, and perhaps this is how life chooses to teach us to move forward. Eduardo looked at her, feeling a whirlwind of emotions. He didn't know how to respond, but he felt the truth in her words. It was as if what he feared most was actually what he needed to accept. Love wasn't a straight line, but a path with unexpected curves, where there could be room for new stories, even after the pain. Helena's words opened a door in his heart that he'd locked shut. It was as if she'd shown him that he didn't have to live trapped in the past forever, that he could open himself up to a future full of possibilities. However, the fear was still there, and he didn't know how to take the next step without feeling like he was betraying Laura, even though that wasn't true. His wife's death had left him feeling guilty, as if his happiness were a reflection of a mistake. He knew, deep down, that Laura's happiness had never been tied to him being unhappy. She always wanted him to be well, alive, happy. This was the lesson he was beginning to learn over time. Life was more complex than he imagined. Love didn't need to be replaced, but perhaps complemented by something new, something he still didn't know how to describe. One afternoon, upon seeing her again, without rushing anything, Eduardo said to Helena, I'm scared. I don't know if I'm capable of loving again. Without hesitation, she took his hands in hers and replied with the calmness he now recognized as her trademark, "It's not about being able to love, Eduardo. It's about letting love enter when it presents itself. The time doesn't matter, nor the right moment. It comes in different forms, and you can choose to embrace it without guilt." And in that moment, Eduardo finally understood. The pain of loss wouldn't disappear, but he was ready to live again. In the weeks that followed, the relationship between Eduardo and Helena took on forms he hadn't imagined. The fear that had once seemed like an insurmountable wall now transformed into something more fluid. Instead of dreading what might happen, he began to appreciate what was happening there, in those small moments of exchange. Every conversation, every smile, every encounter seemed, somehow, to restore the part of him that had previously seemed lost forever. It was one Saturday, during a walk through the same square where they had first met, that something happened. The sun was beginning to set, and the golden light filled the room with a sense of tranquility. Helena, as always, seemed at ease, but this time Eduardo felt something had changed. He couldn't quite put his finger on it, but something inside him was finally loosening. They stopped on a bench, and he hesitantly began to speak. "I don't know what made me think this now, but I wanted to know more about you, Helena. I've told you so much about myself, about what I've been through, but I barely know where you came from, how you got here." She looked at him with a soft smile, and it made his heart race a little. It was a smile of understanding, not judgment. Then, as if she knew exactly what he needed to hear, she began to tell her story. Helena wasn't a woman of many words about her past, but in that moment, she seemed willing to share. She spoke of her childhood, her own loves and losses, and especially her last relationship, the loss that, like his, had transformed her. Unlike Eduardo, she didn't close herself off to love after the pain. She sought to understand what she had learned from him and, at the same time, knew it would be possible to love again, but in a different way. "Life has a curious way of teaching us resilience, Eduardo," she said, looking at him with soft eyes. "It's not about forgetting or letting go. It's about understanding that we don't have control over everything. Sometimes pain becomes part of who we are, but that doesn't prevent happiness from finding its place as well." He was silent, absorbing her words. It wasn't an instant revelation, but little by little, he began to see that there was much more ahead than the simple fear of what he still thought was impossible. Love again. Helena, with her calm and acceptance of what life had thrown at her, seemed to have found a way to live with the past, without being held hostage by it. With each conversation, their relationship deepened. Trust was building slowly, as if each step were a new piece of a puzzle that Eduardo was only now beginning to understand. He couldn't tell if he was simply grateful to have met someone so genuine or if he was truly beginning to love Helena in his own way. One thing was certain, he was beginning to want to know more, to want to be with her. One Sunday afternoon, after a leisurely lunch, they walked to the same cafe where they'd first met. It was no longer about the simple pleasure of a chance encounter, but a shared experience that had already held meaning for both of them. They sat in the same place, and this time, Helena initiated the conversation. "Have you ever noticed that when we're together, things seem easier? I don't know what it is, but it feels like life becomes lighter. I know there are still unresolved issues for you, and I'm not asking you to leave them behind, but I notice that you're allowing yourself to move beyond them, little by little." Eduardo looked at her, surprised by the clarity of her words. He hadn't said anything about it before, but she seemed to understand everything he was feeling, without needing explanations. "It's hard," he began, his voice a little choked. "I feel guilty sometimes, as if, by allowing something new to happen, I'm somehow betraying Laura's memory. Not that I don't love her, but I'm still trying to figure out how I can allow myself to be happy again without feeling like I'm forgetting everything we were." Helena listened to him attentively, and then, with a gentle smile, replied, "The love you felt for her won't disappear, but the love we have now, the one we're building, is also real. And it's not a replacement, nor is it oblivion. It's simply what life offers us when we're ready to receive it." He thought about her words, their meaning. He wasn't forgetting Laura, nor did he love her any less. What Helena was telling him was that he could love again in a different way, but with the same intensity, and perhaps even more. It didn't have to be an exchange, but an addition. And perhaps that was the hardest thing to understand, that love isn't limited. It expands when we have the courage to let it flow again. That moment, that simple coffee, was the turning point for Eduardo. He was no longer afraid of what the future might bring. Little by little, he began to realize that love didn't have an expiration date, and that life did, indeed, have a curious way of giving us new chances. Sometimes, second chances don't come with the same intensity as before, but with a gentleness that allows us to live again, learn again, and, who knows, love again. From that day on, something had changed between them. Eduardo knew he couldn't predict what would come, but he was no longer running away from the idea that the future could be full of new possibilities. Time passed, and Eduardo began to realize that love wasn't the only thing changing in his life. Starting over with Helena brought a new perspective on life and the challenges he still faced, but now with a lighter, more accepting outlook. Although their relationship was gradually becoming more solid, insecurities and fears still surfaced from time to time, like a cold breeze that, though brief, chilled the heart. But, unlike before, he was no longer so willing to push these feelings away. He knew that, with patience, they could be overcome. Helena, in turn, was a foundation, but not in the sense of imposition or pressure. She understood the shadows that still haunted Eduardo's heart, and more importantly, she respected his timing. She also carried her own past of loss and learning, and knew that each person has their own pace when it comes to love and overcoming. She knew that, for Eduardo, moving on didn't mean erasing what had been. This was never required. But she realized that their love was fueled by this mutual acceptance. There were days when Eduardo would wake up with a heavy heart, remembering Laura, with the feeling that she was still there. Somehow, he saw her in many moments, in the home decor, in the music playing in the background, in the everyday gestures that, over time, had become almost automatic. Laura's absence would never be complete, but Eduardo now saw that this didn't mean the rest of his life was doomed to be lived in silence. He had begun to understand that life wasn't meant to be lived in comparison, but as a continuation, an evolution. What he felt for Helena didn't erase what he felt for Laura, but rather blended with him to create something new, something he never imagined possible. It was on one of these days that Eduardo, with a closer look, noticed something significant. They were passing through the city, after a leisurely stroll, when they stopped for coffee at a new place they had discovered together. He looked at Helena and saw her differently, as if he had rediscovered her in that moment. She wasn't a replacement for Laura, but someone with whom he could build something new, based on different values, experiences, and feelings. He realized that what he was experiencing with Helena wasn't a plan to rescue what was gone, but to create something new, a story of his own, one that also encompassed his pains and joys. In the midst of that moment, he spoke, with a sincerity he was more comfortable expressing. Helena, sometimes I still find myself wondering if I'm ready to move on. And I keep thinking, what does it really mean to move on? I don't want this to sound like I'm forgetting Laura. I just, I want to know if I'm on the right path. Helena smiled softly, knowing this was the kind of conversation he needed to have with himself, and with her. She didn't have ready answers, but she offered what she always did, listening and being present. Moving on, Eduardo, isn't about forgetting, as you well know. It's about understanding that life goes on, even when we don't expect it. It's like a river that keeps flowing, but the waters it carries don't erase the beauty of what was already there. There's no need to deny what has been experienced, but to accept that what lies ahead can be equally beautiful, with its own challenges and joys. Helena's words stayed with him for a long time. That river metaphor touched something deep. He understood that life didn't require him to say goodbye to his past abruptly, like a page ripped from a book. The past would always be part of who he was, but the real question was whether he was willing to let the present and the future be part of his story as well. He didn't need to live a life of scarcity, where love was limited to what had been. He had learned that love isn't restricted to one form, but can manifest itself in different ways over time. The next big step came one morning when Eduardo decided to take a more concrete step toward this new life. He walked into his house, noticing the small details that had previously represented only a lack of something, and suddenly, it was as if he began to see everything differently. The picture Laura had painted, which had always brought him a subtle pain, now seemed like something he could look at with a lighter feeling. It was a memory, and at the same time, a connection to what he had experienced. It wasn't something to be left behind, but something that could coexist with what was to come. He then picked up the phone and called Helena, for no particular reason, other than wanting to hear her. The simple act of wanting to talk to her in that moment brought him a sense of peace. Listening to her, he felt no guilt or fear, just genuine satisfaction in knowing she was there. Beside him, when they met later, he looked at her with a sincere smile and said, "I think I'm ready to move on, to really move on, you know? Not for you, or for anyone else, but because I realize that life is full of new opportunities, and I can't just watch from afar anymore." She looked at him fondly, and something in her gaze reflected how much she, too, knew this was important to him, but that it should be a process, no rush, no pressure, just two hearts learning to walk together. The fear of moving forward was no longer an insurmountable wall, but a shadow that, over time, began to dissipate. Now, with Helena by his side, Eduardo understood that love had never been limited to what he had already experienced. What he felt for her was not a replacement, but a form of renewal. He was learning that, contrary to what he had previously thought, love does not end. It merely evolves, adapts, and sometimes reinvents itself. And, in that moment, he was ready to take that step. The relationship between Eduardo and Helena was gradually solidifying. What had once seemed a distant and uncertain possibility now proved to be a constructed reality. With firm, if cautious, steps, Eduardo, who had previously feared the future, felt more willing to live it with Helena by his side, but not in a way that erased his past. He now understood that love wasn't about replacement, but about accepting the various forms it could take, and how it could reinvent itself. And Helena, with her calm and understanding, offered him the assurance that together they could build something unique. They spent more time together, experiencing simple moments that held immense value for Eduardo. They weren't grand adventures or grand gestures, but small, everyday actions that gradually strengthened their connection. It was the quiet walks in the park, the conversations over afternoon coffee, the spontaneous laughter while watching a movie at home. Every detail seemed to have a new meaning, a renewal, a new chance for something beautiful. But there was something that still weighed heavily on Eduardo's mind: his children's reaction. When Laura died, he feared the impact this grief would have on his children. And the process of adjusting for them had undoubtedly been one of the greatest challenges of his life. He worried deeply that by moving on, they might not understand his decision or feel he was disrespecting their mother's memory. Laura's love wouldn't disappear, but he felt there was an invisible barrier, something that needed to be overcome for this new phase of his life to be truly complete. One day, after a quiet dinner with Helena, Eduardo decided he needed to talk to his children about what he was going through. He knew that sharing his feelings would give them the opportunity to better understand what was going on in his heart. He was terrified of their reaction, but he already knew that hiding from reality wouldn't make anyone happy. It was time to be honest, even with themselves. Children, I need to talk to you about something that's been very important to me, Eduardo began, his expression serious and calm. They were sitting in the living room, all attentive to his words. I know this has been a difficult time for all of us, and I'll never forget your mother, but I want you to know that, in my heart, something new has happened. I met someone, and this person has been very important to me. The silence that followed was heavy. His children, a young woman in her 30s, and a man in his 28s, looked at each other before looking at him. Eduardo knew they were processing everything, trying to understand. He felt a twinge of nervousness, but he didn't let it shake him. The conversation needed to be had. I understand if you don't accept this right away, and I know it takes time to accept any change, he continued. What I want is for you to know that, despite everything, nothing will change the love I have for each of you, nor the love I had for your mother. But I also want to be honest. Life goes on, and sometimes it offers us opportunities to be happy again. After a moment of silence, his daughter was the first to speak. Her eyes shining, she said, her voice softer than usual, "Dad, I know it will always be difficult, and that your pain won't go away, but I also know how much you deserved to be happy again. I'm really happy you found someone who makes you feel good." The son, more reserved, was more direct, but with the same sincerity. "I'm happy to, Dad. I know it's not easy for you, but for us, the most important thing is that you're happy. We don't have to forget Mom, but that doesn't stop you from having something good now." Eduardo felt a weight lift from his shoulders. He knew acceptance wouldn't be instantaneous, but their understanding meant the world. He realized that, although the process of moving on was unique and personal, he wasn't alone. Helena was gradually integrating into his life naturally, and the support of his children made this new phase even more possible. Helena and Eduardo continued to build their story, and with each passing day, he felt lighter, freer to be himself, unburdened by old guilt or fear. Their love was far from perfect, but it had something deeply genuine and healing. Together, they were learning to transform the pain of the past into a solid foundation for what lay ahead. Time passed, and Eduardo realized there was nothing wrong with starting over. Life, he now knew, didn't have a manual. It simply moved on, with its ups and downs, its losses and gains. The pain would never be completely erased, but the possibility of living in the now, of allowing oneself to be happy and open to love, became a daily choice. A choice of courage. He realized that true strength lay in accepting that life could be lived to its fullest, without fear of mixing what was with what could be. And with Helena by his side, he finally understood. Happiness doesn't come from erasing the past, but from embracing the present, with all it has to offer. Just like Eduardo and Helena, we can all find new opportunities for happiness, even after great losses. If you also believe in the power of a new beginning, subscribe to our channel to follow more inspiring and moving stories like this one. Let's discover together that it's never too late to start over.